Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another Witch Wednesdays, and today we are looking at some facts and mysteries that are present in the Witch TV show. I've been working on this video for a while, so I am super excited to be bringing it to you today. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So our first mystery is involving Meridianite surnames. Do Meridian inhabitants, residents, have surnames? This is something that has always mystified me because there are sort of evidence both for and against this. So let's just talk about it for a minute. So let's look at our most prominent Meridianite within the TV show, which would be Caleb. Now, Caleb has never been stated to have a last name throughout the series. He's always just known as Caleb. No one has ever mentioned a surname for him. He's just him. He's just Caleb. Caleb, no last name. And as far as we can tell, none of the other Meridianite characters seem to have surnames. Aldorn's never mentioned to have a surname. Akatan's not got a surname. No one's ever mentioned a surname for Julian, or Drake, or Vathek, or Cedric, or Miranda, like anybody like that. No one's ever mentioned to have a surname. And so we can kind of maybe infer that possibly they don't have surnames. I think as well probably a good argument for them not having any surnames in Meridian is that Meridian sort of is a medieval planet. Obviously it's hard to compare because it's not Earth. Meridian's sort of status and advancement places it around where Earth was during the medieval period. They don't have electricity. I don't know how good their indoor plumbing is, although Phobos does have like a pool in his house, so his palace. But they don't have kind of proper currency. They kind of trade things. Their society runs very much like medieval Europe. And during the medieval times, it was actually quite common for people to not have surnames. The elite did, the royals did, the wealthy and the aristocrats and the nobility had surnames. But quite often, the people who were the lower in society, the peasants, didn't always have surnames because they kind of didn't need them. Like, you're talking about societies, villages that were very, very small. So you might be the only, John in your village. I mean, admittedly, everyone did kind of have the same name back then. Everyone's name was, if you were a man, your name was William, Robert, John, David, Edward, George. And if you're a woman, your name was Anne, Elizabeth, Mary, Margaret, Jane, or Jean. So you probably wouldn't be the only one. But the point is that the societies, the villages and stuff that existed were so small that when you talked about someone, people knew what you were talking about. You didn't have to have a full name. And so sometimes people had full names, they had last names, and they didn't even know them. They didn't know what they were. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. And so they didn't really need to know much more than the sound of their own name. As long as they knew what to answer to, the noise that came out of someone's face meant that they were trying to get their attention. They didn't need to know more than that. And Meridian does seem to be quite small. We don't really know if there are other towns and villages in Meridian outside of what we see in the TV show. Everything seems to kind of take place in that one town that sits at the bottom of the kind of twisty cliff that Phobos' palace sits atop. So it's possible that when you've got a town that small, maybe Caleb is the only Caleb. He probably is the only Caleb. Julian's the only Julian. Aldorn's the only Aldorn. So no one needs a surname because everyone will know who you're talking about. If you mention Julian, everyone knows you mean Julian because there isn't anyone else you know who you're talking about. And so maybe they just don't have surnames, in which case Caleb's name really is just Caleb. He doesn't have a surname. But there is one character who breaks that logic completely, and it's the one Meridianite who does have a surname, which is Elias Vandal. Elias Vandal has always had the name Elias Vandal. He was Elias Vandal in the comics and he's Elias Vandal in the show. It makes slightly more sense in the comics because in the comics there's this whole historical lore about how Meridian was originally a planet. It only had like beasts, like non-human species, but then some British people got to Meridian and like took it over, and then like that's how we got they were called the Escanors, and that's how we got Elion's family, because in the comic Elion's birth name is Elion Escanor, which is never mentioned in the show. She's always just Elion Brown or Elion Portrait, depending on where you come from. But we never get anything about the Escanors, and we never hear anything about Meridian. And because Meridian in the TV show has far more human characters, in the comics the only humans in Meridian that we ever see are Elion's family and Caleb. And Caleb isn't human, he just looks human. People can shapeshift, obviously. Cedric can look human, Caleb can look human, but they aren't actually humans. But Phobos and Elion are, and they seem to be the only true humans that exist on Meridian. And so it makes more sense that things are a bit different. And Elias Vandal, I'm pretty sure there is some kind of backstory to him about him coming from Germany, because obviously Vandal is a German surname. But in the TV show, there are far more humans in Meridian. We have Caleb, we have Julian, we have a whole bunch of like the children that we see that day in the episodes. It's Ambush at Taurus Felony. There's like 3 kids playing with a ball. They're all human. Trill obviously isn't actually Trill, but she is human. She is human. So we have far more human beings in Meridian in the TV show, which obviously adds a layer of confusion about why Elias Vandal has a surname but everyone else doesn't. In the comic it makes sense, but in the TV show it doesn't. And that then raises the question of, well, if Elias has a surname, why doesn't anyone else? Why is he special? Why does he get to have this full name, which is also a very German name, considering we're on a different planet? So why would he have a German surname? Really weird. But then why would Caleb have a Jewish first name? I suppose, you know, there's a lot of questions there. Elion's first name is also Jewish. So why did Queen Weira and Zaden name their child after the Greek god of fear? These are all other mysteries that I haven't even talked, they're not even a part of this video, but those are their own mysteries in themselves. But I think we can probably go with because they need to have some kind of name, and that's the name we went with. But yeah, so then that raises the question of why Elias Vandal has a surname but no one else does. But actually, there is something in the series that hints that Caleb might actually have a surname, because in one episode, and forgive me, I can't remember exactly which one it is, because it's literally a blink and you miss it moment, there's a wanted poster of Caleb up on a wall in the Meridian town, and on it we can see it says like wanted Caleb, and then after Caleb there's just like this kind of squiggle that's obviously, it's like what they do when they're trying to show that there's words there but they don't want to have to write actual text, so it just is a squiggle. And it's after his name, so it's like wanted Caleb squiggle. And the squiggle suggests that he has a second name. It's not just wanted Caleb, like in like letters, because he's the only Caleb. It looks as if he has a surname. And if he has a surname, then that throws everything into chaos, because then that means he really does have a surname, which means that everyone else in Meridian presumably has a surname, and we just don't know what any of them are. And we'll never know, because no one is ever going to give us an answer to that question. So the mystery here is, do the Meridianites have surnames? And I suppose the evidence that we have between Elias Vandal's existence and the wanted poster of Caleb kind of suggests that they probably do have surnames. We just have no idea what they are. Personally, in my own headcanon, I prefer them not to have surnames. I think it just makes life a lot easier if we just accept that it's a medieval society where the people just are their first names and they don't need surnames because there's not enough of them to require people to have full identifying names. They just are who they are and everyone just knows who you're talking about. But whether or not that's canonical in the actual series will remain unsolved. Like every mystery in these videos, because no one's ever going to give us an answer. This is BuzzFeed Unsolved Witch Edition. Next up, we have a fact, and it's a fact about Blunk. So, a fun fact about Blunk that you might not know, and this is from the Digital Bloodlines interview with Andrew Nichols. Blunk actually isn't originally a witch character. Blunk was actually from a pilot that was created by Andrew Nichols and Daryl Vickers along with Howie Mandel years before W.I.T.C.H ever came onto the scene, and the pilot never got picked up. But there was a character, and the main character had this sidekick called Blunk, and he was this little kind of funny, you know, toad-like creature. And since they had the rights to him, they owned the rights to him, he was their character from their IP, when they needed someone to kind of add some comic relief into W.I.T.C.H, because they kind of felt like they couldn't just have the main characters being funny all the time, because they needed to be taking things seriously. Obviously, it's a high stakes environment, lives are at stake, you know, people are getting hurt, there's villains and evil. You need someone who's a little bit more removed from that to kind of inject a little bit more comedy into the series. And they decided that since their pilot hadn't got picked up, but they were still really passionate, they really liked this character that they created, they felt like he would work really well to move from being the sidekick in this show to being Caleb's sidekick in W.I.T.C.H. And so they took him and they put him in W.I.T.C.H, and that is how we got Blunk. And I am forever grateful, because if you know me, you know that I am the biggest Blunk fan you'll ever find. I am Laws the Blunk stan. Going back to people's surnames though, we've got the mystery of CHYKN's surnames. If you're not aware, CHYKN is the abbreviation for the previous group of Guardians. We're not talking about actual chickens here. The previous Guardians being Cassidy, Halinor, Yanlin, Kadma, and Nerissa. CHYKN! Now, for some reason, and I have no idea how this happened, it became fanon on the internet, so much so that it appears on fanfiction.net. It is literally everywhere. I see people tagging them with these names on Tumblr. People keep trying to edit the wiki to put them back in, and we have to keep taking them back out because they're not canon. Someone somewhere along the lines came up with these fanon surnames for the other members of CHYKN that aren't Yanlin, and they got picked up, and then people thought they were canon. But they aren't. Their names are not Crossnick, CHYKN, Starlighter, and whatever the hell Halinor's last name was. I don't even remember. Someone told me what they thought it was. Clarkson? Clarkson. I think it's Clarkson. And obviously it's hard to Google because the W.I.T.C.H fans that do know that they're not canon are always trying to purge all reference to these names from the internet because they're not canon. So then when you're trying to actually look it up to make a video like this, it becomes difficult. But yeah, people had them down as being Nerissa Crossnick, Cassidy CHYKN, Kadma Starlighter, and Halinor Clarkson. Those are not their names. They were never... CHYKN were never given canonical surnames. I don't know why. Obviously, they would have surnames, or at least you would assume they would have surnames. Bearing in mind, though, that there are very many issues with the comic timeline regarding CHYKN that we're not talking about in this video, because this is purely the show. But there are some mysteries over there that we will need to talk about someday. But they were never given canonical last names. And I'm all for fanon. By all means, come up with fanon surnames. I certainly have. I actually decided with my own, when I'm doing, like, writing W.I.T.C.H fanfiction and working on, you know, my headcanon continuation of the show, I kept CHYKN because I actually liked it. I thought Cassidy CHYKN actually sounds like a really nice name, so I kept it. But it's just important to know that those aren't canonical names, and that means that their real names are still a mystery. We will probably never know. They maybe weren't ever given any. Like, maybe the writers don't even know what their last names were because maybe they never came up with them. But I find that hard to believe. I find it weird that they wouldn't at least give them a full name. I don't know why you would create a character and not give them a surname. That's really weird to me. But yeah, Kadma's last name is not Starlighter. No one's last name is Starlighter. I just think that's really important to get across. I hate Kadma Starlighter more than I can ever express to you. I hate that so much. Another fact for us all, Irma in the TV show is a lesbian. Sort of. Okay, let's try and break this one down because it gets a little bit messy. According to Greg Wiseman, who is the supervising producer and a writer on season 2 of W.I.T.C.H, he always felt that Irma was a lesbian. And for him, that was how he was having the season written. He was writing it with Irma being lesbian as canon within his mind. And being that he is the writer, you know, even though it's not explicitly stated in the show, if he was writing it with that impression, then that would be canon. Even if it is a bit... There's a real death of the author going on there. But what I mean is that if that was how he was writing it and he is the one writing it, then that makes it canon. But the fact that it's not ever actually mentioned in the TV show makes it murky at best. Now, this is despite the fact that Irma throughout the series has a crush on multiple characters. She has a crush on Andrew Hornby that gets brought up all the time in season 2. She is absolutely obsessed with Vance Michael Justin, the pop star, even more so than Cornelia, who is the president of his fan club and was trying to flirt with his poster. But according to Greg Wiseman, he actually felt that Irma's obsession with these two guys was actually a kind of misguided attempt to fit in rather than being genuine attraction. It was her trying to be straight to fit in with all of her friends rather than her actually feeling anything towards these characters. And according to Greg Wiseman, quote, "For me it has to do with her only truly being interested in guys that are obviously out of reach. She's fighting to be straight, which I think is not uncommon in our culture. But by choosing unattainable choices, she's guaranteeing that she won't actually have to end up with a guy. And when she actually comes close to landing one of them, she bolts. None of this makes it impossible for her to be straight or bisexual or whatever, but in my gut, that's what I sense is going on." Unquote. So for Greg, he felt that Irma was actually chasing these guys who were unattainable in an attempt to try and fit in and look straight. And while I'm not sure I personally agree with that, I don't know how... I'm bi, so it's hard for me to say, but I don't know how common it is for lesbian women to chase men in an attempt to fit in. I can't honestly say, because I'm not a lesbian and I can't tell you what that is, and I can't give you the experience of other lesbian women, nor would I want to speak for them. So while I'm not sure if I can agree that that makes sense for her character, I do think I can understand where he's coming from, because Andrew Hornby is quite a few years older than Irma, and therefore it's unrealistic that she would ever actually get together with him. And Vance Michael Justin is a huge celebrity, and again, unlikely that she would ever actually get together with him. And you can be obsessed with a celebrity and not... I mean, she obviously does seem to be crushing on him, but you can be infatuated with a celebrity and not actually want to date them. Like, I absolutely, you know, I have a bit of a crush on David Jason, who played Del Boy in Only Fools and Horses, but he is in his 80s, so I'm not exactly trying, nor would I ever try and actively pursue a relationship with him. You know, you can be really into a celebrity, but also know that realistically you wouldn't want to enter into a relationship with them, is what I'm trying to say. Do I personally think that Irma was a lesbian? I would love to think that she was a lesbian. And I think most of the fandom kind of feel that she makes sense as a lesbian, both in the comic and in the TV show. If you ask anybody about their headcanons, about the characters in terms of their sexualities, pretty much everyone will always come forward and tell you that Irma is sapphic to some degree. Whether she's bi, or she's pan, or she's a lesbian, she's into girls. And I would love that. I would love for her to be a lesbian. I would love for us to have that representation in the show, especially in one of the main characters. So I certainly agree, and I am happy to accept it as being canon that Irma's a lesbian. It's just kind of murky in the TV show, because I don't entirely think it's maybe the best way to do representation, to have Irma chase guys and then say it's just because she's trying to fit in. Especially if you don't make that clear within the narrative, because then it's not really representation when she's not ever actually stated to have any feelings towards girls, or we don't acknowledge this in the slightest. Like in Fate the Winx Saga Season 2, we have this whole thing where Terra talks about how she has basically that exact plot. She says that she deliberately went after guys who were bad guys and then tried to justify it as being that the guys were bad. It's not that she was gay, but she was actually gay, and she realized that she was going after the wrong guys so that she had a reason to not be with them, because she wasn't accepting that she was actually into girls. But again, that kind of plotline only works if you actually explicitly state that that's what's going on. Otherwise it just looks like she's straight. And that's kind of the problem. But also we are talking about an animated cartoon for children released between 2004 and 2006. So there's only so much you can do, and we will come on to that very topic later. Next up, we have a third category. I've got a few of these on the list, which is my personal speculation about certain things within the series. And this one is my personal speculation that Caleb is left-handed. Now, this might literally just be the way they animate the show, but if you pay attention throughout the series, anytime Caleb is writing or doing any kind of real significant sword fighting, he's always using his left hand. When he's taking orders in the Silver Dragon, he writes with his left hand. Quite a lot of the time, if you actually watch when he's sword fighting, he can sword fight with both hands, and he does. But predominantly, if you pay attention, he's usually got his sword in his left hand, and he does seem to do most things with his left hand. And if that was done intentionally, I just think it's kind of cool. I mean, I don't know if maybe like left-handedness is more prominent in Meridian. I haven't bothered studying the other characters to see what they do. Maybe I should. Maybe we should do some kind of study on this and see if left-handedness is actually dominant in Meridian as opposed to right-handedness on Earth. Why is that? Is it due to the gravitational pull of the planet? Who knows? It could be anything. But I do think if they did that intentionally, that's pretty cool because you know, left-handed people deserve their representation, and especially when you're doing stuff with live action actors, they will obviously use whatever hand they use in real life because that makes more sense than trying to make an actor write or perform actions with their non-dominant hand. But in animation, I suppose it could be really easy to just naturally kind of draw everyone as being right-handed because that's what we expect as a society of predominantly right-handed people. And if they actually went to the trouble to make one of the characters explicitly left-handed by always drawing him doing stuff with his left hand, I think that's pretty cool. And I just wanted to point it out. So if you're a left-handed person out there, then you have Caleb as your representation. Another mystery for us to discuss now. Just what the hell happened to Weira and Zaden? If you don't know, just because their names are very, very rarely ever mentioned in the TV show, Queen Weira is Elion's mother and the royal consort Zaden is her father. Same with Phobos, presumably. That I don't know, but presumably Weira and Zaden are Phobos' parents as well. What happened to them? Now, obviously they must have been alive long enough to give birth to Elion, or at least her mother must have been alive long enough to give birth to Elion, otherwise Elion would not exist. So they were certainly alive 13 years prior to the start of the series, because Elion is only 13 in season 1. So they must have been alive 13 years prior to the series beginning. But what happened to them? Honestly, we get hardly any information about this, and if I remember right, I don't think they ever really talked about it in the comics either. I've just came out, I'm partway through rereading the second arc in my Yen Press graphic novels at the moment. So I'm not long finished with reading Arc 1, and I don't remember them ever actually addressing that at all. So obviously the timeline's a lot more vague with the comics than it is in the TV show. But we really don't know anything about what happened to Weira and Zaden. I think everyone kind of assumes that Phobos probably murdered his own parents, and that is what I personally believe. I think that makes a lot of sense. He obviously has real issues with the fact that he lives in a society where his sister is destined to be the queen and he is always going to be second fiddle. He obviously thinks he should be the ruler, but Meridian is a matriarchal society, so he does not get to be the ruler. That's why even when he is ruling the world, he's not King Phobos, he's Prince Phobos, because you can't have a king. According to Meridian's, laws, you can't have a king, you can only have a queen. Which, you know, girl power. But I can kind of believe that he was really angry with his parents for some reason. Maybe because they had a daughter. Maybe he was alright with having a sibling, and then when she was born and he realised that, you know, now they had a baby sister, that his position within the power structure of Meridian was being threatened, that he lost control and killed his parents. I don't know. But that's definitely a mystery that kind of permeates the entire series, because we're never going to find out. We never do find out what really happened to Elion and Phobos' parents and why it happened. Did Phobos kill them? If he didn't kill them, then what did happen? You know, we know that Elion was brought to Earth to protect her from her brother, which makes sense because he is evil. But what happened to her parents to lead to that situation? Were they killed? Were they still alive when Elion was brought to Earth? Were they the ones who sent them to Earth, like in twitches? You know, where the king and queen got Eliana and Karsh to bring Alex and Cameron to Earth to protect them from the darkness, which, you know, turned out to be the king's brother. Spoilers if you've never seen Twitches. You know, was it that? Were they alive at the time and they deliberately sent Elion to Earth to keep her away from Phobos, and they thought that they could deal with him themselves and they could keep Meridian safe from him, and then they failed and they died? I don't know. I really don't. And it will probably always be a mystery because I don't think anyone will ever be able to give us a definite answer to that one. And honestly, I don't even know if the writers know. Maybe they never thought about it. Or maybe they just thought that we would all accept, you know, the presumption that Phobos murdered them and not question it. So, I don't know. I don't know the answer. Next up, we have another fun fact, and it's once again related to characters' sexualities. And this one is the fact that within the TV show canon, Cassidy and Nerissa were a couple prior to Cassidy's murder. Greg Weisman, once again the supervising producer of season 2 of W.I.T.C.H, stated at the Convergence Con that he wrote season 2 under the belief that Cassidy and Nerissa were lovers prior to, well, Nerissa yeeting Cassidy off a cliff. You know, we all love a good love story. we love a happy sapphic love story. Anyway, that's what Nerissa's "you have no idea what she meant to me" line is, in case for knowledge. Greg said that he wanted to make this more explicit. He wanted to make that more obvious to the audience, and also to kind of make that part of Nerissa's character. It obviously adds a depth to her when we think about the fact that she was so consumed by power that not only did she murder one of her best friends, she murdered her girlfriend, which is a whole other level of evil. This is a person that you are in love with, someone who is in love with you, someone who trusts you implicitly, and you murder them over power, over magic powers, and who gets to be the keeper of the heart of Kandrakar. It's such a silly, trivial reason to kill someone. You know, she was still a guardian, she just wasn't in possession of the heart anymore. She could have just accepted that and moved on, but she didn't, and she was so angry about it and so power hungry that she murdered her own girlfriend over that. And that obviously makes a whole, that's like a whole other kettle of fish when it comes to her character. And I think it's really important because Nerissa, when it comes to the people she loves and the people that she has affection for, is such an interesting part of her character in season 2 of the show, because she's got her son, you know, she's got Caleb, who she clearly loves, although in a very warped way, and she's not very good at being a mother. In fact, she's truly awful at being a mother. She clearly has some kind of affection for Julian. She keeps letting Julian and Caleb go no matter how many times she captures them, because even though she's really angry at them and they're on the wrong side and they're not helping her and she wants them on her side, that she wants them to be loyal to her, and they won't, and that annoys her, she can't really ever hurt them properly because she does feel something for them. And we see at the end of the series in her illusion world that she has Caleb and Julian on her side, ruling with her. They sit on either side of her when she rules the world, and you know, Caleb calls her mother. So like, that's obviously in her mind, that's like her perfect scenario, is to have this man that she loves and her son that she loves with her ruling the world. And I think that makes her such an interesting and complex and layered character, that she's not just this one-dimensional villain of evil, that she has a lot going on in her psyche, and that's why she's one of my favourite characters. I love her to bits. So I think knowing that she had this romantic relationship with Cassidy and she still killed her just adds another layer of complexity to a character that's already very hard to understand, you know, hard to pin down, and who has a lot going on in that head of hers. But of course, Greg said that the reason why they couldn't make that more explicit, even though it obviously would have been really good for her character, a really interesting part of her character, and good for, well, good for representation on Cassidy's side. Probably not great for representation for the bisexual women of the world, being that our bisexual rep in this show would be the crazy killer evil lady. But I still love Nerissa, and I'm happy to accept her as our bisexual queen, as much as she's maybe not the most positive rep that we're ever gonna get, but I'll take it. I'm happy to accept Nerissa as our bisexual queen. But Disney would not allow anything more than the one line that we got, which is vague enough that, you know, if you don't know it's meant to be romantic, you wouldn't know, because you would just be like, oh well, yeah, it's her friend, like that makes sense. But like, it's not meant to mean that. It's meant to mean you have no idea what she meant to me because I loved her and then I killed her as you do. Also, in Greg's opinion, he said that he thinks that Cassidy would have been a lesbian and Nerissa is a bisexual because she loved Cassidy, but she also clearly loved Julian, so that makes her bisexual. Talking about CHYKN though, just how old are these ladies? The ages of CHYKN are never explicitly stated, and actually what we do know about them kind of makes it very hard to pin down what age they are, and kind of contradicts. There's some contradictory things going on here that just make it really hard to figure out what's going on. So Yanlin's obviously old enough to have a granddaughter, so she has to be, you know, old enough to have had a child herself, and for that child to then have become old enough to then have his own child. And so that would place her at least in her 50s, you would assume, unless her and Chen had their children, like, if she had Chen at 15 and then Chen has Halin at 15, then by the time the series starts, then she would be like 43. But I find that very hard to believe. One, because she was a guardian, and I just can't imagine her having a child. Being pregnant while flying around trying to save the world seems unrealistic. Also, we probably don't want to be in, you know, doing teen pregnancy in the Witch universe. I mean, nothing wrong with being a pregnant teenager, absolutely not. But it just doesn't seem like something Disney would have been going for. You know, they already had the struggle with Andy Mack, and that was like 20 years later. Well, no, like 15 years later. So yeah, I find it hard to believe they would have been writing the series with the idea that there was like multiple teenage births in this one family. So what age would that make Yanlin realistically? Especially when she does look older, she's quite wrinkly and stuff. So I'm thinking she's at least in her late 50s, if not her 60s. I mean, looking at her as a character, would place her late 60s, personally. She has her natural hair colour. She's not gone grey. In the comics, she's grey, but in the TV show, she still has her natural hair colour. So I would say she's probably not as old as maybe, you know, my grandparents when I was born were all in their 60s. So by the time I was 13, they were all in their 70s. Late 70s. But I'm thinking she's probably not as old as that because of her hair. But the problem is that Cassidy has a mother. Now, Cassidy's mother honestly looks the same age, if not younger, than Yanlin, which makes no sense. Because obviously Cassidy and Yanlin are the same age. Cassidy might look really young because she's perpetually stuck in the body of when she died, but she, if she were still alive, would be the same age as the rest of her friends, who, as I just said, I was assumed to be about 60. And we're talking, Kadma looks a certain age, her hair has gone grey. Halinor, they've got wrinkles. Nerissa obviously looks as if she's spent her entire life in a sunbed, but there's reasons for that. The other ones, though, I would say all look probably in their early 60s. But that would be really hard then to have Emily look as young as she does, because if they're all in their 60s, she presumably should be in her 80s, at least, if not older. She does not look like she's in her 80s. She looks very young. In fact, like I say, she looks younger than Yanlin. She looks maybe about 50. Something is severely wrong there. And I suppose the only way we can try and make that make sense is if we say that Emily is just like a very young looking like 75-year-old, and maybe she did have Cassidy when she was about 15. So like, you know, she's 15 years older than her daughter, so then that would make Cassidy 60. And Cassidy, according to the comics, is the youngest of the group, so Yanlin would be slightly older than her, so would the other three, so they all might be in their early 60s. that would add up. That I can understand, and that makes more sense than trying to make Yan Lin be like 38 years old. But it's still kind of wonky because I just don't think Emily, I think they just animated her way too young for it to make sense. It doesn't add up. She shouldn't be as young as she is, because she might be Cassidy's mother, but we have to remember that Cassidy died like 40 years ago, right? Like, that's the thing. Cassidy died like 40 years ago, and she was about 16 to 18 then, because she mentions when she's talking to Nerissa about her being late for curfew on prom night. So she'd been old enough to go to prom, so she was like at least 16, but considering the former Guardians look older than Witch, I would say they were probably more like 18, 19 at the time, which would mean that Cassidy would have died when she was about 18. It's 40 years later. Emily should definitely be older than she is. We're not talking about someone who's 18 now with a mother. We're talking about someone who was 18 40 years ago with a mother. So yeah, I think that one's probably predominantly down to an animation fail with them not making Emily look old enough. She obviously can conceivably still be alive. There's no reason why she wouldn't be. But she's too young. But I would say the women are probably in their 60s. And if we want to make it really, really make sense, then we'll just say that Emily had Cassidy extremely young and is just a very young looking lady who's been using her anti-aging cream, and it's working wonders on her face. But speaking of Emily, I'm on to another speculation here, which is that I think that Cassidy's mother, Emily, is blind. Or at least very, very partially sighted. The reason for that is because I remember someone saying online, how does Emily not question the way that Nerissa looks? And I mean, maybe Emily's just really nice and doesn't want to point out the fact that Nerissa looks older than she does, which does canonically make sense because Nerissa's been using so much power without being connected to an aura mirror that it's been draining her life force, which is making her older and older and older. Also, she's like lost a whole hand because she's got like a metal hand, so the girl's not been taking care of herself. She has not been using her anti-aging cream. So you would think that Emily would question, like, Nerissa, honey, how are you looking so old? Like, are you okay? Do you need to see a doctor? Your skin is literally grey. Are you alright? You've got a big old scar on your face. You're missing a hand. What happened? Like, what happened to you? But I think probably Emily's just very blind. Or, like I say, maybe not completely blind in the sense that she can see shapes and outlines and lights and colour, but she can't see clearly enough to see what Nerissa looks like. So all she sees is this tall lady with really long hair. Nerissa always had really long hair, and she can hear her voice and she sounds the same as she always did. So she knows that that's Nerissa because she can see the shape of her, she can hear her voice, but she can't see her properly. And she can't see her well enough to realise how old she actually looks. And that, I think, because another question someone posed with the same thing, is how does she not question how young Cassidy is when she gets brought back to life? Now, possibly Cassidy just explained everything to Emily, and Emily is just very open-minded and is like, fine, sure, you died, you came back, you magic, fine, whatever. Or they explain that Cassidy's been missing for some other reason, and she just is so poor sighted that she can't see how young Cassidy looks. So she, again, sees someone who's got the outline of Cassidy, she has her voice, she's got her hair, so she's like, that is definitely Cassidy, but she can't see how young she actually looks. So to her, she just assumes that that is Cassidy at the age she's supposed to be and doesn't realise that she's only like 18, and she just goes with that because she can't see. It's like Moonlight, the TV show Moonlight, one of my favourite shows. Mick St. John is a vampire, so he doesn't age, and there's just like one woman that he's been able to like go and visit for like 60 years, and she doesn't question the fact that he's not getting older because she's blind. And she's like the only person that he's been able to be friends with that long who isn't a vampire, because everyone else would eventually have clocked on to the fact that he doesn't age. But she doesn't, because she can't see him. So all she can do is hear him. So as long as he sounds like him, she doesn't think anything of it. She doesn't realise that he's looked exactly the same for 60 straight years. So it's that kind of thing, I think, is probably what's going on. So I think that Cassidy's mother, Emily, is blind. And that's my justification. Speaking of wonky timelines involving CHYKN, let's talk about that time that Kadma, Yanlin, and Halinor fought Phobos on Zamballa. So according to P is for Protectors, Yanlin, Halinor, and Kadma once fought Phobos on Zamballa back when they were still Guardians. Now, as far as we know, they were Guardians about 40 years ago, which just doesn't add up. Phobos is in his 20s at the most, probably in his early 20s, maybe in his mid-20s, probably not late 20s. He was not alive 40 years ago, unless he is incredibly old and he's been using the life force of Meridian to keep himself young. Now, that is feasible, and I think that's what he does in the comic, because he's always like hooked up to vines and he's like draining their energy. But in the TV show tries much harder to make things more grounded with the timeline. People aren't just like centuries old for no reason, you know what I mean? Like in the comic book, Nerissa says that she's been like living on top of Thanos for like centuries or something, which makes no sense, because then that means that Yanlin is like an immortal being, which is just baffling. They put a lot of stuff into the comics that just does not make sense, and the TV show tried really hard to make sense when it came to, well, everything really. So I find it hard to believe that Phobos is actually like older than 40. I mean, if this was 40 years ago and he was an adult then, that means that he is like at least like 60 years old. And I just find that really hard to believe, especially because that would then mean that his mother was like never went through menopause and she was just having kids 13 years ago, even though he was like 50 or in his late 40s. I don't know, I find that, no, I don't think any of that makes sense. My justification for this one, though, is that maybe, the Guardians were actually the Guardians longer than we know about, because it is only the three of them. Nerissa and Cassidy aren't there, so this obviously took place after Cassidy was killed and Nerissa was locked on Thanos. It's just the three of them. So maybe they were kind of still doing Guardian things. Maybe they were actually Guardians longer than we realise. Now, according to P is for Protectors, Kadma got stuck on Zamballa when the veil was raised. She was there trying to help rebuild the planet after Phobos' attack, and then the veil was raised and she got stuck. So that would mean that this took place just before the veil was raised, just before Elion was brought to Earth 13 years ago. So that would mean that they were still Guardians up until like 13 years prior to the start of the series. Now, it's possible that they were just planning to continue as a trio, but now that Kadma is stuck on Zamballa, they've gone from 5 to 2. And they probably realised that it's not feasible to have Yanlin and Halinor as a duo trying to save the entire universe, and that was when the Guardians were broken up. And then 13 years later, they decided to hand it over to a new generation. Why they didn't just get a new generation straight off the bat, like when Yanlin and Halinor realised that they couldn't do it anymore, why they didn't just replace them then, I don't know. But I do think it seems weird, because I think we do all kind of jump to the conclusion that this must have happened 40 years ago. But at the same time, that would have meant that Kadma was kicking about on Zamballa for years before the veil was raised and she was stuck there and couldn't ever come back. So I think probably this actually happened far later than we think, and it happened right before the start of the series, and that actually the three of them had been working as a Guardian trio for years. And we have to remember that when the girls go into Guardian form, it changes their physical look and makes them look older. But does that then mean that if you are older than that age, then it makes you look younger? And Andrew Nichols actually discussed that in the Digital Bloodlines interview, that he thinks that it would be really interesting if that was the case, if you had adult Guardians, but when they transform, they look like teenagers again. And I think that would make sense if you just always look that way. So they turn back into their normal forms and they're women in their like 50s, but when they go into their guardian form they look like 19. So that's what I think the explanation is there, but ultimately this is an odd situation, and again, whether or not the writers really thought that one through is a mystery in itself, and there are more of these. I think we'll leave it there for now. We'll make this a part 1. I didn't know how long this video was going to be, but it's getting on a bit, so I'll say this is going to be part 1, and we'll put up part 2 very soon, hopefully next Wednesday. But for now, thank you for joining me for part 1. Obviously I've still got a whole bunch of mysteries to go, so if you do think of any and you think that I've missed them, it's very possible that they're in part 2, so do wait and see if your mystery appears in the next part. But let me know what you think of the ones that we've discussed so far down in the comments below. Please remember, as always, to like and subscribe because it's super helpful. I'm almost at 100 subscribers. Obviously it would be great to have more, but 100 will be a big milestone for me, so I would love to have you here on the channel. So please consider hitting that big subscribe button and help me out. But other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye everyone.